Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have with us Jamie Hayes. Jamie is a research scientist at DeepMind and a PhD student at the Information Security Group at UCL. Today, he will be presenting us his work on provenance, on determining the original source of a given signal, and novel signal watermarking techniques.
Great. Thanks, Vasilis. And yeah, thank you for the invitation. Seems like it's pretty interesting. Given the talks that have already been presented at this seminar series, it's an honor to actually speak at this. So you've already done my job. I'm Jamie. I'm a PhD student at UCL and a researcher at DeepMind. And today I want to talk about this snappy title, Towards Transformation Resilient Provenance Detection of Digital Media. So this can be boiled down to essentially trying to design some kind of scheme to detect if different signals have been digitally altered and like what the provenance of that signal is. So just before I go into, well, let me first motivate like why we need this. So generative models and generative machine learning has made like pretty amazing advancements over the last few years. To the point now where I would claim that a lot of synthetic signals that are created by these generative machine learning techniques are, for all intents and purposes, practically indistinguishable or nearly indistinguishable from natural signals. And so I've just listed a few examples in different domains. So the first domain would be text consumption. The best known example, I think, would be OpenAI's GPT-3, which made a huge splash in the media last year, or was it I think it was last year that it was released. So this is a model that can basically ingest text data, understand that like the information present within that data, within that text, and then give like reasonable responses to that text. So OpenAI recently announced, so in I think March, they announced that it's used by hundreds of different apps, by tens of thousands of developers, and it's producing billions and billions of words every day. So this is a fairly convincing example of like how powerful generative machine learning has been in the text domain. In the audio domain, I picked an example that Google's duplex system as an example for like how far progress has come. So Google has a reservation system called Duplex, which is available now in basically the entire of the United States. What happens is that customers can call up a service that they want to book with, like a restaurant or a hairdresser's or something like that, and they can have a conversation with this duplex model. So the system can ingest raw audio, it can process it, and it can give like the reasonable correct responses. And not only that, but it does this while matching things like cadence and intonation of natural speech. So it doesn't really feel like you're talking to a robot or a machine. The final example would be is in the image domain. So I picked the Face app, which possibly many of you have installed on your phones. So this Face app is believed to be using like a GAN architecture, like StyleGAN or something like that, and it allows people to modify images of their face. So you can basically de-age yourself, you can age yourself, you can change hairstyles, you can see what you would look like with glasses on and things like that. And these look very, very realistic. So this has been downloaded over 3 million times in the Google Play Store. So the natural thing to ask is, well, of course, we've made really impressive advancements, but it's natural that like these have been misused and they've been bent in different ways from the intentions of the original creators of these models. So I've picked 4 examples that kind of go towards like trying to convince you that devious things can happen, but I could have picked many more. So let's just go through a few of them very briefly. So the first example I picked was this example of in April, Richard Coles, who is a foreign affairs committee, is on the Foreign Affairs Committee in Latvia's parliament, claimed that individuals use deepfake technology to trick him into believing he was speaking with a member of the Russian opposition party, when this was later found out to be false. So we don't actually know what the technology was, but it was believed to be some kind of deepfake technology that would morph someone's face into looking like someone that he knew. The second example was that I picked is in 2019. A doctored video of the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was put online on Facebook, I think, where she appeared to be impaired or intoxicated in some way. And this was shared over 2 million times, I think, on Facebook. And given the incredibly factious nature of recent politics in the United States, it's not hard to understand and imagine the dangers of these kind of political attacks. A slightly more interesting example, perhaps like unexpected, is this example that made the news in March, I think, where a cheerleader's mum in America anonymously texted videos and images of a rival cheerleader to her coach. And these images, one of these images was a deep fake, or some of these images were deep fakes. So some of the photos basically were digitally altered to make this cheerleader appear to be naked. And there were other images of them drinking and smoking and things like that. So the mother was eventually charged with harassment. The prosecutors weren't entirely clear on which of the photos were real and which of the photos and videos were edited. The victim claimed they were all fake. And the whole thing was a bit of a mess, and generally it was generally classed as harassment. And the police later found out that through metadata analysis that the video actually was indeed fake. So I think the really interesting aspect of this story is that it's not only high-profile political figures that are the targets now of these kind of attacks. So ordinary people are also kind of caught up in the public uncertainty about authenticity of media. And this tech is now clearly becoming accessible to the ordinary man on the street. A slightly perhaps less sinister example, which I've decided to include, would be as an example that was a news story that came out recently about a middle-aged Japanese biker who really loved bikes and wanted to share his love of bikes with the world. But he realized that perhaps people don't really want to watch middle-aged men talking about like motorbikes. So he used FaceApp to transform his image into that of a young Japanese woman. And using this kind of alternate persona, he gathered like a very, very large social media following. So I think the summary of these four examples is that deepfake technology is here. I think most of you will have heard about the dangers of these kinds of this technology. What I don't think is widely reported enough or widely talked about enough is that it now gives like some kind of plausible. It gives a certain amount of plausibility to any kind of act that is captured by digital media. So even if it's real, you can maybe claim that it was fake. So I think for both of these reasons, I think my claim throughout this talk is going to be that when deemed necessary by creators of digital media or stakeholders within that have a stake in the content that is being created, they should have the ability to sign statements of authenticity or in some way assert its provenance. So what I'm going to do now is go through a few of the different ways that people have tried to come up with ways of asserting provenance, and then talk about why I don't think these are the correct ways of doing them. I'm going to propose the solution we've come up with, which is by no means perfect, but I think solves a few of these different problems. Okay, so let's look at the first example of a way that you could maybe try and assert provenance. The first example I'm going to talk about is visible watermarking, and I'm going to use the fairly reprehensible example of an app that is called DeepMind. So this app is available not on Play Stores, but it's available on like underground forums and things like that, or through its own website, I think. And this app is designed to basically digit alter someone's appearance to make them appear as though they are naked. The app comes in two versions. It comes in the free version and it comes in a premium version. So the free version will always overlay to any image that it creates the words fake in a big red banner. So it's, and there is a premium version that will basically take this watermark, this banner that says fake, and it will push it into the top left corner, I think. And so predictably, I think you can all guess that like very soon after this app was released, there started to be cracked apps, cracked versions of this app that take this image and basically just crops out the watermark, and so you no longer have this kind of this watermark that asserts that this image is fake. So I think the lesson, specifically the lesson with visible watermarking, is that, well, for this specific lesson is that it's not robust to simple cropping attacks. And I think the more sinister point is that visible watermarking gives a very reliable signal to any kind of attacker of when they've succeeded in their attack, right? So this is a property that you really want to avoid. Okay, so let's look at another way that we could try and learn to detect, to assert provenance. So I'm going to use the example of some of the related work on detecting synthetic signals specifically. So there is some recent work by Mara et al. Who have showed that if we take an image and we apply some denosing filter onto it, and we take the residual difference between these two images, the statistical patterns that are left by natural images look very, very different from the statistical residual patterns left by images that were created by generative image models like GANs and things like that. And so this difference can be used to train some kind of detection tool. The big problem, I think, with trying to use this line of research is twofold. It's only really concerned with understanding the learned biases associated with generative models. So the detection methods are not robust, right? They're not concerned with like adversarial attacks. So they're not. So the big problem is, for example, if you took this Mara's detection tool and you added like a bit of noise to it, to these images, the kind of fingerprints that are left are completely destroyed, and the detection is left redundant. The other problem, I think, is that we don't really want to restrict ourselves to just detecting synthetic media, right? We may a stakeholder may like want to protect or discover provenance of non-synthetic signals that are owned by themselves or some other stakeholders. So we don't want to. So I will repeat, we don't want to restrict ourselves to just purely synthetic signals, and so these detection methods that I've just talked about are not really that much use for that kind of setting. So the third approach I'll briefly touch upon before I'll come back to it later is just to use an off-the-shelf 0-bit watermarking technique. So this is an invisible watermarking technique, and 0-bit here means just we don't really care. We don't want the watermark to contain any information other than just asserting that it's present. So just asserting that the watermark is there. So most academic work in this space, as far as I can tell, provides strong guarantees against a very small subset of attacks. So I've used the example here of broken arrows, which was developed quite a while ago now, over 10 years ago, but as far as I can tell, it's still quite a popular technique, and I haven't seen any other 0-bit watermarking techniques that claim to be superior to this method. So the broken arrows 0-bit watermarking technique is based on watermarking in the wavelet domain, and it's shown to be optimally robust to Gaussian noise, but it doesn't try to provide any kind of protection against other attacks that you might expect in the image space, such as like cropping or compression or rotation, these kind of things. So so I'm just going to show you like how good the watermarking broken arrows looks when it's robust against watermarking. So this is the original image. This is the watermarked image using broken arrows, and this watermark is robust to this level of Gaussian noise. So if we basically watermark our image and then we add like this amount of Gaussian noise, the broken arrows to scheme will still be reliable and detect that the watermark is present. Now, if we rotate our image, if we basically rotate our image, watermarked image, then basically we get no reliable signal of detection. So this is the level of kind of perceptibility of the watermark that we need to insert using this technique to make sure that if we rotated the image, we would still detect the watermark. So clearly this is a good scheme if you only want to be robust against a certain subset of attacks, but if you want to be robust against any kind of attack that that you may expect in the image space, this just won't do. Okay, so the fourth approach that I'm going to briefly touch on is just probably the most simple, which is given a content generator, which is this G here, that outputs like different images given some query. It's just to basically store every possible manipulation that someone could apply. So basically, you take your image, you apply every possible like transformation, such as rotations, zooming in, adding noise, things like this. And then when someone like out in the wild manipulates this image, you basically, and someone comes along and asks you, does this image like come from your content generation scheme? Then you can basically just go and just do some checking. Clearly, this is infeasible. This comes at the expense of storage space. So there's possible workarounds. Maybe you want to use nearest neighbor search, or use like locality sensitive hashing or something like that. But then we would need to bake in some kind of appropriate distance function that measures similarity of images and is reliable. And it's still not clear if these kind of approaches would scale, given that you would still need to store every kind of query that you generate. So every kind of like content that you generate, even if you don't like store all the different manipulations, which again is very expensive in terms of storage. Okay, so let me just very quickly define the problem that we want to solve. So we have some underlying generative mechanism, and we have a model that takes basically our underlying distribution and basically creates like images. So this could just be like a camera, but it also could be like some generative image technique, like a GAN or something like that. So we have our outputs, X. We have a set of transformations in some transformation space, T, and we want to create some kind of detection method, D here, that will basically, given a transformation selected from this transformation space, if our transformed image actually originated from G, then when we predict 1, and it's not from G, we predict 0. So basically, we reliably predict if our image X or our output X originated from G under some set of transformations. And I briefly talked about 4 different ways you might try to do this, and briefly mentioned why I think all of those are insufficient for this problem. So I will talk now about like our solution, which is most similar to attempt 3, which is 0-bit watermarking. So in particular, we're going to use 0-bit watermarking as well. The key difference is that we try and co-design the detection and the watermarking function such that they are robust to a large set of different transformations that someone could apply. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk you through how we designed our detection mechanism. And I'm going to use generative models, generative image models as a repeated example, but I'm going to stress again that our mechanism that we design can be applied to any kind of digital media, both natural and synthetic. So let's look at the example we looked at a few slides ago, where people have tried to design detection functions that learn the difference between just natural and synthetic signals. And let's take the example of trying to learn the difference between two like distributions of like dog images. So let's imagine that G outputs images of dogs, but G hasn't learned a very good representation of a dog, so they look radically different from the natural space of images of dogs. So the first obvious point to make is that in this specific setting, a detection function can be easily designed because these two distributions are very dissimilar. So that's a very clear point. The problem, of course, is that the whole point of generative image models is to try and like better match the target distribution, which would be the natural space of dogs. So this solution is really predicated on generative models performing quite poorly, right? If our generative image model matches the distribution, the target distribution, which is the natural space of dogs, this means that like it's very difficult. We now have basically a very difficult time deciding between these two distributions, and so this detection method kind of falls flat. So we have the really unattractive quality that as generative models become better, our solution will become worse. So we can check out of this particular arms race by just simply introducing watermarks, as I've talked about before. So now generative models can become as good as they want, and in fact, this would be preferable, and there is no tension between increasing the power of G and the detection function, because now the detection function doesn't try to learn the difference between this image of this dog and this image of this dog. It tries to learn basically just to detect if this noise pattern was present or not. Okay, so so we've designed a solution. We take our content generation scheme, we generate content, we apply some kind of watermarking process. So now we have a watermarked version, and this watermarked version should look very similar to the original content. And then we have some kind of detection mechanism that decides if this watermark was present or not. So the question now is, are we done? And the answer that I'll give to you quickly is no. Otherwise, I could end my talk here. So the problem is the same problem as I mentioned a few slides ago. So we don't get to control this part of the pipeline. We don't get to control what is actually presented to the watermark detection function. And the problem is that most schemes are actually only robust to a very small number of different transformations an attacker could apply. So for example, if I watermarked this image with the broken arrow scheme, and then I rotated it by 90 degrees, and then I presented this to the detection method, most likely it would say that this watermark wasn't present, even though all we've done is basically shifted the image slightly. So this is clearly not a great thing, a great property to have. So how do we solve this problem? So, so I like machine learning, I like neural networks, so we're going to model this detection method as a neural network, and we're going to co-train both this watermarking process and this watermark detection process together. And we're going to train them to be robust, as I said before, against a large number of different transformations someone could apply. Okay, so let's talk about how do we actually do the watermarking. So imagine we have a method, a watermark detection method that has been trained and detects watermarks. How do we actually insert watermarks into images? So we're going to take inspiration from the adversarial machine learning community that have repeatedly shown that adversarial examples, and by adversarial examples, I mean examples that a human would easily classify. So for example, if you took an image of a dog and it looks very much like a dog, like the image I showed you in the previous slide, under some adversarial noise that is imperceptible to humans, this would be wildly misclassified by like state-of-the-art machine learning classifiers, image classifiers. So people have repeatedly shown these kind of adversarial examples are very robust to defenses. And by defenses, I mean, if you added some noise to this adversarial image, or if you cropped this adversarial image, or if you compress this adversarial image, it would remain adversarial with respect to the image, the classifier that was under attack. And we can use this nice property to design our watermarks, because these are the exact same properties that we want in our watermarking scheme. So we want our watermark to be robust to all of these kind of corruptions that someone could apply. So this is what this image shows. So we have our decision boundary with this line bulged in black, decision boundary between the watermarked class and the non-watermarked class. And let's say we want to watermark this image here. So we have, so what we do basically is follow the gradient direction within some epsilon ball to try and cross over the decision boundary to the watermarked class while maintaining visual imperceptibility of this watermark. And so this epsilon here basically will make sure that the watermarks are imperceptible, and we can just and we use projected gradient descent to design these to design this watermark. So this is exactly the kind of objective we aim to solve, right? So our f theta here is our decision function. X is our original inputs. Delta here is our watermark, and this loss basically tells us how strongly this input, this X plus delta, is classified as watermarked. And so basically we find some delta that basically will, when added to this X, will be strongly classified as watermarked. Okay, so let's briefly talk about how we actually train these things in practice before I go through a whole set of results that try to convince you that this actually works. So how do we do this? So we have some input here, which is a picture of a deer. What we do is we then sample, given a space of transformations, we sample a number of transformations. So in this example, I've cropped this image, I've rotated it again. We could add Gaussian noise. We could add maybe some compressed version of this, some differentially compressed version of this. We pass these all through to the detector. This will basically give us a confidence of how strongly these were classified as watermarked. And what we do then is basically just find the expected gradient that would cause the gradient that basically that would cause these images to be strongly classified as watermarked. So this is what's put here in math. So we have our p theta here, which is basically the detection method. We want basically this probability of being watermarked under this transformation to be high. And so we basically approximate this expectation using a number of transformations. So for our training, I think we use 16 for every image. And then once we found the expected gradient, we just add this to the image. So after that, then we have basically two images, or basically we've doubled our batch size. So we have like our original images and we have our watermarked counterparts. We again apply like a huge number of transformations. We pass these through to the watermark detector again, and then we just update the detector like using standard training, using classical cross entropy loss to make sure that these are both classified correctly. And then we just do this repeatedly up until the model has learned to basically be robust to a huge number of transformations. Okay, so a quick point before I talk about like what kind of methods, what the evaluation. With the natural thing to ask is, given what kind of attacks should our detection method be robust to? So hopefully what the criteria should be that if any transformation, we should be robust to any kind of transformation that does not significantly deform the signal. What do I mean by that? Well, if an image conveys some information, such as identity in this image here, and that information is still present after some transformation, so if we just do the identity transformation, or if we crop the image, but the identity information is still present in that after that transformation, we would ideally want our detection mechanism to still work. Unfortunately, in the image space, at least, there aren't many good proxies for what humans perceive as visually similar images. So in lieu of like a very good proxy, we're going to use structural similarity score. So this is basically an improvement over like mean square error or something like that, that should take into account things like luminance and contrast, and things that people may perceive as visually similar. So it's a score that ranges between 0 and 1 means our images look identical under this score, and 0 means they are completely dissimilar. So under this metric, we can tolerate poorer detection, so more mistakes from our detection mechanism, as long as this is strongly correlated with structural similarity. So as structural similarity goes down, meaning the image is distorted more and more, we may be able to tolerate more mistakes by our detection method. So two other things that I will just briefly mention. We're only going to really talk about common corruptions in this work. So we only really want to be robust to things like compression, cropping, rotations, and blurring, things like that. And the other important thing to note is that our threat model demands that the adversary does not know if they have been successful. So the adversary cannot access the underlying detection method and have a feedback loop of if their attack was successful. So it's kind of a blind attack. Okay. So the first question we asked, let's talk about the results now. The first question we asked was, given a transformation that deforms the images in such a way that it reduces the structural similarities to some value, how perceptible does the watermark need to be in order to ensure that our detector will never make a mistake after this transformation has been applied? So another way to say this is, given a transformation, what is the highest possible structural similarity between the watermarked image and the non-watermarked image, given that when the watermarked image is transformed and then passed to the detector will always correctly recognize the image as watermarked. So the way that we measure this is we trained our detector model on ImageNet. We took 1,000 ImageNet samples and watermarked them with our method. Then for each of these watermarked images, so each of these 1,000 watermarked images, we applied 100 transformations. We created 100 transformed images for each of these 1,000 images by applying centered Gaussian noise, just a certain standard deviation. So this created a test set of 100,000 watermark samples for each given standard deviation. And then what we do is we measure the structural similarity between the watermarked and non-watermarked images, and the structural similarity between the transformed or noisy watermarked images and the non-watermarked counterparts. And we did this contingent on demanding that our detector will have a detection accuracy of greater than 99% on this set of 100,000 images. So this is what this image shows here. It shows the image similarity, the structural similarity against this standard deviation of Gaussian noise that we may apply. So the first thing to note is that, so this blue line is the structural similarity between the watermarked and the non-watermarked images, and this orange line is the structural similarity between the non-watermarked images and the transformed version of the watermarked images. And this black dotted line is the broken arrows technique as well. So first things to note is that the blue line is far above the orange line for any standard deviation. So the watermark doesn't really need to become perceptible or visible to be detected, even under like significant like distortions and transformations that significantly distort the image. The other thing to note is that the blue line quite actually matches the black dotted line, which is the broken arrows watermarking scheme, which is quite a big positive for us because our method was designed to be robust against a large number of transformations, and yet we're performing equally as well to a method that is optimal for this specific type of transformation, this Gaussian noise transformation. So these are some images that will basically just highlight like how well we're performing. Maybe depending on the size of your screen, it's quite difficult to tell. But this, for example, this image here that I'm highlighting is the original image. This is the watermark version of that image, such that it is robust to Gaussian noise at this level. And then this is the analogous watermark for the broken arrows. And broken arrows, as I should say, can only operate in grayscale, on grayscale images. So I think that the important thing to note is that this axis of images here, which are watermarks, are actually quite indistinguishable from the original images, yet they are all they all tolerate a large amount of Gaussian noise. So for example, here, you may be able to just see that there is like some perceptibility of the watermark, but it's very, very robust in that it can be detected under a large transformation Gaussian of a large amount of Gaussian noise. Okay, so we can do perform like the similar evaluation for other types of transformations. So I won't spend too long talking about this, but we have results on things like cropping. So for example, we can do the exact same experiment, but instead of adding Gaussian noise, we can just crop our images to a certain width and a certain height. And our method is like completely robust to this. So the image similarity basically remains constant, even as you like chop off more and more pixels of the image. Whereas the broken arrows version, like the structural similarity drops to like 0 after if you chop off more than 5 pixels. So this is like represented here. If you chop off more than like 5 pixels from each dimension, the broken arrows attack is the broken arrows watermarking scheme is essentially broken. We can also do this with rotation again. So we create 100,000 images by randomly rotating them by some like maximum rotation angle, and then we measure how perceptible the watermark needs to be to make sure that we always correctly recognize these that we always correctly identify the watermarks. And again, like the blue line here basically shows that even at a rotation angle of 180 degrees, so we're free to rotate in either direction by 180 degrees. The perceptibility of the watermark is essentially 0, so the structural similarity is very high, and even under like a very large distortion.
May I ask a perhaps basic question?
Yeah.
So in this experiment and in the previous one, the broken arrows watermark seems to kind of malform the image. But I thought that the watermarking is applied before the whatever transformation is taking place. So why is this actually happening? I'm probably missing something there.
Yeah. So sorry. So I haven't put the broken arrows versions of the images because you would basically just see this malformed image rotated. So you're correct that it is applied before the transformation. What I'm basically showing is that the perceptibility for broken arrows, the amount of like the perceptibility of the watermark needs to be at this level to make sure that after when you say apply a transformation to this watermarked image, it is reliably detected by their scheme. So for example, if I'd created a watermark using broken arrows that didn't like alter this image significantly, but it like looked it was indistinguishable from a non-watermarked image, and then I applied these rotations, it wouldn't be reliably detected by their scheme.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So I have like 50 minutes left, 10 minutes left. So I will briefly talk about some other experiments we did. So the last set of experiments asked how perceptible the watermark must become in order to be correctly identified after some transformation. So we can ask the natural follow-up question, which is, if we fix watermark perceptibility, so we fix some level of structural similarity of the watermark, how is detection accuracy affected under different transformations at this level of watermark? So we have 3 different scatter plots here. So the scatter plot on the left is for non-watermarked images. So basically we're plotting the attack success, which would be false positives. So the attack basically making the detector think that a watermark was present even when it wasn't, against the structural similarity of between the non-watermarked image, the non-watermarked image and the transformed version of that non-watermarked image. And then in the central image here is basically the attack success on watermarked images at this level of perceptibility. So we're going to watermark images with an epsilon of 1/255, which basically means that the image similarity between the watermark and the non-watermarked images is very high. So this is represented by this blue dotted line. So the similarity is basically 1. And at this perceptibility of watermark, we're going to apply different transformations and then measure the similarity after those transformations and against the success of the attack. And then we can do this as well with a slightly higher epsilon, which means the watermark is slightly more perceptible, which brings down the structural similarity from about 1 to about 0.8. Although if you actually look between this image and this non-watermarked image, they look virtually identical. So each of these markers represents a different attack, a different type of transformation. So there's a bunch of different attacks in here. There's Gaussian noise, there's blurring, there's compression, etc. And each of these markers represents the average attack success over 1 million different data points for this given transformation. So we basically take the entire ImageNet data set, ImageNet training set, and we repeatedly apply different transformation, and then we basically, so this will give us a data set of 1 million points, and then we basically measure how successful is the attack, i.e. how many failures did the detection how many failures did it induce in the detection mechanism. So the really good thing to note here, first of all, is that none of these scatter points here live in the top right quadrant, which would represent a really successful attack, because it would mean that the attack was successful while maintaining a very high structural similarity, which means the attack didn't have to induce a lot of noise in order to make a successful attack. So most of the successful attacks actually live in the kind of top left quadrant, like for example here, which means that even when the attack is successful, the similarity between the watermarked, the non-watermarked image and the transformed version of the watermarked images is very low, which means it's very easy to, the attack has basically washed out a large portion of the image. So we can put a few different examples. So I'm just going to highlight the Gaussian noise attacks in green here. So we can decompose these different transformations. So I've highlighted the Gaussian noise in green. So the leftmost figure, the bolded green, is Gaussian noise at a variance demonstrated here. And it reduces the structural similarity to below 0.4. And this, basically the attack success is about 25%, which means at this level of Gaussian noise, over 75% of the images were still correctly identified as not having a watermark in this specific case, out of 1 million data points. So the central image is kind of like a failure case. So at this level of Gaussian noise and at this perceptibility of the watermark, the attack was 100% successful. So because the watermark was quite weak in that we only watermarked at epsilon of 1/255, the attack basically this level of Gaussian noise completely washed out the watermark, and the detector wasn't able to successfully recognize that a watermark was present. If we slightly increase the epsilon of the watermark to 12/255, so we've slightly decreased the structural similarity of the watermark, the attack basically reduces, the attack success reduces to 0. So we've kind of solved that problem, but we've had to do this at the expense of increasing the perceptibility of the watermark. We can plot some other things like rotation. So rotation, we can repeat this exercise for things like rotation. So we have 0 false positives at this little angle at this angle. We have 10% false positives, which is this bolded blue point here for epsilon over 1/255, And for epsilon over 12255, we have like zero false negatives. And I think, how are we doing for time? Okay, I have 10 minutes left. I'm going to skip over a lot of stuff. So we have basically results on false positives, basically say that if you try to induce false positives, that you can't be successful. We also have like results that show that we are robust to outer distribution transformations. So let me briefly talk about that. So the evaluation pipeline has basically measured robustness to transformations that were included during the training process. Of course, that's not realistic because we can't really hope to measure every model every kind of common corruption that someone could apply. So what we did was we basically trained 7 different watermark detection methods, where for each different model we choose to omit one specific transformation. So we basically, for example, trained a model that didn't use blurring during the training process, or didn't use brightness changes in the process, or didn't use JPEG compression, etc. And then what we do is we basically, for each of these 7 models, we take the CFAR10 data set, and we create a data set of 10,000 images that were watermarked and were not watermarked. And we apply these different transformations, and we see how well our model can recognize images, recognize watermarks when we apply transformations that weren't modeled during the training process. So this is what's represented by the diagonal here. So this is the accuracy on different transformations. So for example, with brightness changes, if you didn't include brightness during your training process, and then you measured how well your model, your detection model works on brightness changes at test time, we're still like correctly classifying over 99% of watermarked images correctly. The same goes for things like cropping and contrast and Gaussian noise. So it's not that important to model these during training. These are kind of learned. These are kind of learned even if you omitted them from your training process. Things like compression or rotation are actually quite important to model during your training process. So if we omitted JPEG compression, or if we omitted rotation as a specific transformation from the training process, we actually are only able to correctly classify, for example, 67% of watermarks correctly. Whereas if we included JPEG compression during the training process, sometimes we can correctly classify over like 100% of images correctly. So it's very important. There are some transformations that are very important to be mindful that we should model. Okay, so I'm going to try something now just to conclude my talk, which is to play audio over a Zoom talk, which may be a terrible idea. So we've also extended this work to the audio domain. And again, we can plot things like attack success against audio similarity, which we measure using signal to noise ratio. And so the transformations in this figure include things like cropping, resampling, adding noise again, cutting out part of the audio and things like that. What I'm going to play to you is basically 3 examples. So first I'm going to play the non-watermarked audio, then I'll play the watermarked audio at a certain epsilon, which is epsilon like 4 to 0.004. And then I'll play like a slightly more perceptible watermarked version of this audio. And the slightly more perceptible is robust to a lot more attacks. So that's why we have to increase the perceptibility. And hopefully you should really recognize the difference between these 2 examples. So let's see if this works.
Take exit 57 for South Carolina 64 toward Lodge Walterboro.
Yeah, and please tell me if this isn't going through. So that's the non-watermarked version of that audio, and here's the watermarked version of that audio.
Take exit 57 for South Carolina 64 toward Lodge Walterboro.
And our detector basically correctly classifies the first one as non-watermarked and the second one as watermarked, and it's also robust to a large array of attacks. So you can add like lots of things. You can compress it, you can resample it, and it will still recognize it as watermarked. And here's the slightly more perceptible version of that watermarked audio. So you might be able to hear a bit of background noise in this version. Okay, I skipped.
Take exit 57 for South Carolina 64 toward Lodge Walterboro.
And finally, what I'm going to do is I will just, let's skip that one. I'm going to play to you. Oh, no, I won't play to you because it's unavailable because I haven't made it available. I'm going to play to you then some Gaussian noise added to these audio images or audio samples, such that we still like correctly classify these samples as watermarked. So this will probably sound like rain falling or something like that in the background.
Take exit 57 for South Carolina 64 toward Lodge Walterboro.
So that's the kind of audio that we can be robust against. And there is a large number of audio samples that I can share with you after the talk. So we're robust to things like resampling, like cutting out a large section of the audio and things like that. And the detection mechanism still works. We can also, I will skip that. We can also like extend to multi-bit watermarking, but I won't go into that because that's not really the point of this talk. So in summary, just to leave time for questions, we have developed a general method for watermarking digital media that is robust to a large number of common corruptions that may occur in either the image or audio domain. So on benchmark test sets in the image space, we have very strong evidence that we're performing better than state of the art. So using broken arrows watermarking scheme and other watermarking schemes. In the audio domain, our watermarks seem to be very robust to large numbers of like audio attacks, audio space attacks, like resampling and things like this. And it's quite imperceptible. So the way that we measured imperceptibility of our audio watermarks was we conducted a human study, which I haven't like gone into details about, but you can find the details in the paper, which is linked below. And just some ideas for future work. So we have like lots of like empirical results on robustness to different transformations, but it would be really nice if we could get some like guarantees of like detection. So we have like some results for a very small, very limited threat model, but it would be really nice if we could extend these kind of like certified techniques to consider like to be robust to any kind of like transformation you could apply. So like if you rotated it or something, rotated the image, like can we guarantee that our watermark will still be detected rather than just relying on the empirical evaluation? The second thing that the problem is that we have so the similarity metrics are quite poor. So structural similarity signal to noise ratio doesn't really map to what humans would consider visually similar or audio similarity. So we're kind of relying on human evaluation for the audio in the audio domain. Can we move beyond that? And the final point that I'll make is that watermarking is quite broken under adversarial attacks. So if you assume, if you allow the threat models to consider attacks that get access to this detection mechanism, and you can use like very standard adversarial attacks to completely break this watermarking scheme. So that is something we probably need to fix if we kind of relax this threat model as well. And with that, sorry, I've talked for quite a while, so we have 2 minutes left if anyone is interested or wants to ask any questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to share all the audio samples and things like that, and image samples are available in the paper, so you can have a look there if you're still interested.
Thank you very much, Jamie. That was very exciting. Yeah, we have a couple of minutes left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the live streaming, and we can, if there are any questions, we can go ahead and ask them. I don't know if there are there any questions? Anyone
Well, I do have one question, and
Yeah.
yeah. So, well, thank you, Jamie. It was, yeah, absolutely fantastic. So I kept wondering about, like, if the kind of detector could be approached in adversarial terms, as in adversarial example terms. Do you think that problem can be solved? I mean, that seems to be very, very similar, if not the same problem of, defeating adversarial examples. So maybe given the solution to one, we're going to have the solution to the other one, or maybe it's simpler in this case.
Yeah, so I think they are very related. So basically, I'm using adversarial, like the kind of attacks that we use in adversarial examples to design the watermarks. So I think there is a lot of like points you could take from the adversarial like example research community and apply to this problem. The only slightly different thing is something that I mentioned before, which is the threat models, which assume kind of like the assumptions about model access is slightly different in the watermarking scenario. So so it's not completely clear if you can basically map one identically to the other, but yeah, I completely agree. Like we could probably take a lot of like research that has been done in the adversarial example space and apply it to for these kind of problems.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up on that. So if the model is not kind of accessible to the attacker, so say I'm thinking a sort of criminal forensic kind of lab, where the model is isolated and is being used by some specialist, then maybe you would be able to provide like an interactive tool where they can add and remove noise. So instead of just having guarantees against any sort of noise, which is of course quite hard, perhaps you could have a way of removing noise interactively, and so given a few tries using it for detection, maybe.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. I skipped over the slide, but we do have some examples of, I did have like a few experiments that like looked at transferability. So if attackers can basically design their own watermarking scheme and then craft like watermarks against their own detection method and then see how well it applies. This is kind of taking the black box transferability of adversarial examples and then like seeing how well it works in this space. And there's some like experiments that we have like towards that show that like this is actually still quite difficult to do. So we can basically design watermarks that are very specific to one model. But yeah, sorry, I'm not sure if I answered your point, but yeah, there's a lot of like space, a lot of like opportunities, I think, to apply like research that has already been done in the adversarial machine learning community and apply to these problems.
Thank you.
I have one question. I'm conscious that we're over time though, so I'll be very quick. So I found it very fascinating that it actually remained somewhat robust against cropping, which means it kind of learned to perhaps uniformly distribute whatever it is adding. Then I don't want to say noise because it's not noise, it's not random. The watermark throughout the image or the signal, basically. Did you study or have any insights on the structure of the watermark? Was there anything interesting there?
So we didn't really look at the watermark structure, but you are correct that we specifically designed it to basically be uniformly distributed over the entire image. So the way we did that was basically we just used L-infinity transforms. So we basically modeled our adversarial budget, like our watermark budget in terms of L-infinity, which means it will like implicitly be distributed like uniformly over, well, it will be implicitly distributed over the entire image space. If we'd chosen a different LP norm, if we'd chosen like L1 or something like that, you can imagine that like it may have like placed like the watermarks in only a small like region or small section of the image, which means it might not have been robust to these kind of geometric attacks. Which is, so this is an intentional like design choice to use this kind of this L-infinity norm to defeat these kind of attacks.
Okay, thanks very much. That was very exciting. Thank you for giving us some insight on your work. I guess there is a preprint online, right? It's the URL there.
Yeah, so there's a preprint online. A link to that is like a Google Drive folder with like a huge number of audio samples and like images that people can have a look at if they're interested.
Perfect. Thanks very much, and have a good afternoon.
Yep. Thanks. Thanks you. Bye-bye.